graduated from reading something like Atomic Habits, How to Influence and Influence People, and now you want to get into the classics. So congratulations, we all start somewhere. The question is, what books should you read, or should you start with, if you want to get into classics? Classical literature can be really intimidating for most readers because it has this image of being a difficult book with hard language, and it's really a difficult place to figure out where to start because there's books that people talk about all the time, like Ulysses, Gravity's Rainbow, something like The Brothers Karamazov or War and Peace, and you don't even know what to start with because those books I would never recommend to a beginning reader. So I've made a collection of 5 books that I think are the easiest for people to read to get into classical literature. These books are relatively easy in terms of their language, they're very rewarding to read, and they're also quite famous books that if you tell someone you've read, they'll be like, oh, this guy knows his stuff. He clocked your tea, you know? No, that's not the phrase, I don't know. I read too much. So yeah, 5 books that you should start off reading classical literature. So the first book that I recommend is pretty easily 1984 by George Orwell. It's a book that a lot of people get into classics with, and depending on what school you went to, you might have read it for school. But other than the fact that it's just a very interesting book, it has pretty simple language, it's very well known among the circle of people who read classical literature, and it's quite well respected. And it's also very relevant to the time in terms of it's a political book more than it is a classical book. It talks about oppression, tyranny, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, and the story is very easy to follow. There's like one part that's like the crux of the entire book that people find it hard to get through, not because it's difficult to read, but because it's quite boring. But other than that, 1984 is probably the best recommendation that I could give for readers to start with classics. I have the Wordsworth edition. As you can see, it's quite battered and beaten up. I think I poured coffee on it, but it has some nice notes at the end regarding stuff like the Spanish Revolution, mini essays by Orwell, but you can get other ones. I think there's a Penguin hardback classics that's quite nice as well. But 1984 is definitely one of the books that I would recommend. Now, who would talk about beginning classical literature without talking about The Outsider or The Stranger by Camus? So I have the Modern Classics edition by Penguin. It's a very short book. It's about 100 pages altogether. The language isn't too difficult to understand. And again, the story is very straightforward. This book is a companion to Camus' philosophical book, The Myth of Sisyphus. So it's basically a book about absurdism, which is a type of existentialism. And it's very prevalent in today because everybody has these feelings of nihilism, and it's probably because of the way that our moral factors have sort of declined, the way that value systems have changed, and it's very relevant. So other than the fact that it's a very interesting book, it'll teach you a lot, it is also very relatable to most people. People say they relate to Rousseau, and obviously they do. People feel estranged from society. Take a read of the book, and it's really simple to read. A little mission for a person who's trying to read this: focus less on the feeling of estrangement and being an outsider, and think about how people treated the character after the main part of the book. So something happens, I'm not going to spoil it, but the way that he's treated afterwards, take a look at how it works. Try analyze it, try write about it, try journal about it. Think about how people treated him, specifically the prison guard. That's not a spoiler. Specifically how the prison guard treated the guy. It's very interesting, and it's a part of the book that's not really paid attention to that much. So the next book that I would recommend is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. This book is a bit more niche than the other ones, I guess. It's well known among the reading community, but most people wouldn't have heard of Dostoevsky the way that they would have heard of 1984. So this book is a psychological thriller about a guy who kills an old lady, and it goes into the depths of nihilism, it goes into philosophy, it goes into religion, and it talks about morality. That's not a spoiler. The whole book is less about the murder and more about the psychological impact of the murder. Now, when it comes to how the book is read, there's really nothing difficult about the book. The language is very easy. The story is very easy to follow. Most of Dostoevsky's books aren't very well paced. They don't have a lot of stuff going on for a while. This book is different. It's quite well paced. There's a lot of stuff going on. Lots of different stories, lots of different characters, all over the place. The one thing that I would recommend for reading this book is you should probably get a grasp of Russian names, because Russians have nicknames, they have patronyms, and then they have their first names and surnames, like, you know, most English-speaking countries. So it's quite difficult to understand because people will be using different names, but they're talking about the same person. But that's really the only difficult part. Not to mention, Dostoevsky is so well revered in the reading community. If you said you've read him, you'll get, like, people will be like, well done, you know your stuff. Dostoevsky is definitely, he's my favorite author, and he's the person that you should start reading. Most importantly, if you've read this, try go ahead reading something like Brothers Karamazov, Notes from the Underground, The Idiot, Devils. Those are really good. White Knights is also pretty good to get into, but that's pretty famous on TikTok, I heard. So yeah, Crime and Punishment is definitely one of the classics that you should start. So the next two books, the final two, are a bit more difficult than the originals, than the first three, but they're definitely, like, you can read them if you put some time into them. So the fourth one, I'm counting these, they're two books. I'm counting them as one. They're the Homeric epics. I have the Iliad in the back, but I have the Odyssey here. So these stories will pay dividends to your reading journey as you go ahead, because they're so well referenced. They're referenced in nearly every single book in the world. They're like the backbone of modern literature, and there's no reason why you can't see why. Christopher Nolan's coming out with the Odyssey movie, so you might as well get reading this. It's about Odysseus trying to get home to his island of Ithaca after the Trojan War. So, you know, the whole Battle of Troy, you know, the Trojan horse, that was it. So the Iliad is about Achilles specifically and coming to terms with death. But the language is a bit more difficult because they're poems and they're epics as well, so they're not a novel. And it takes a while to trudge through it. It's a little bit more difficult to understand. The biggest thing that I would recommend is learn your Greek gods and have a notebook for all the words that you don't know, so you can write them down and have the definitions ready for you whenever you see something that you don't recognize. But this is such a rewarding book to read, because not only is it incredibly interesting, but it's also so rewarding as a reader to read something a bit more difficult than the average book that you might pick up in the store. So the Odyssey and the Iliad, 100%, you gotta pick them up. Now, the final book that readers might be shocked to see on this because of its utter size. It's a 1,000-page book, so be ready. Don Quixote, or Don Quixote de la Mancha, depending on which version you get. So this book is about a guy who goes crazy reading chivalry novels of the chivalric knights of the Middle Ages and thinks that he's a knight, and basically goes throughout Spain in the 1600s pretending to be a knight and just going through adventures with the Squire Sancho Panza. That's not the whole of it. It's the funniest book that you'll ever read in your life. It's not a difficult book to read. The language is very easy. It's easier than something like Crime and Punishment or the Odyssey or the Iliad. It's just people are thrown off by its size and by its stature in the reading community. It is so famous. Other than Shakespeare, Cervantes might be the most famous writer of all of time. It's the most bought novel, and for a reason. It is utterly hilarious. Its philosophical depth is unmatched. The characters are amazing. It does away with picaresque novels. It's considered the first modern novel of today's age. And it's so easy to see why. It's so well written, so funny. It's divided into two books as well. So if you read the first book and if you decide you don't really like it, you can just toss it away. Seriously. But you won't. You're going to have a favorite part of this book, a favorite story, a favorite adventure, a favorite Sally, and you will have it and you will talk to everyone about it. You'll be that guy telling everyone to read Don Quixote. So I have the vintage edition, translated by Edith Grossman. It's very good. I know that there are certain translations of Don Quixote which have quite archaic language, so I would recommend something like the Penguin edition has very good translation as well. I forget the guy's name, but I have the Edith Grossman edition. It is amazing. Don Quixote de la Mancha is a book that if you tell people you've read, they'll be shocked, because like no one's read it nowadays. It's really declined, and it's a 1,000-page book. You won't feel like it's a 1,000-page book. And if you finish it, you will feel so rewarded, I promise you. So those are the top 5 easiest classics to get into if you want to get into reading classical literature. I really hope it goes well for you. I know reading Atomic Habits is quite a shameful thing nowadays. If you want to keep on doing that, keep doing that. But seriously, the classics are the most rewarding books that you can ever read. And I really hope it goes well. Thanks.